welcome to Relish Books. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. So I talked about in a video a little while ago about how I found this at a used bookstore. And I recognized the title. I think I've seen it on a list or something somewhere. But I had in my mind a different idea of what it was about. I wasn't sure what it was about, but I had some sort of association from where I thought I'd heard about it. So when I started reading it, I was very, very surprised because it was totally, totally different from what I was thinking. I think I must have been mixing it up with something else, but I'm still really glad that I got it because it was really, really interesting. So I'm just going to talk about it a little bit today. It was published in 1937, and it's a really immersive and vibrant kind of perspective on this post-Civil War culture in the South. And one of the things that I love about it is that that is the setting, but that's not what it's about. That's in the background. That says it's an underlying theme. That's kind of the secondary focus of the book. You feel its influence in everything, but that's not the focus. And that's something that I love because in a book dealing in such an in-depth way, really, about race and culture, I feel like it's so much better done than a lot of modern writing because most modern writing on this topic is so heavy-handed. And this politics and stuff on this topic take the forefront of books that are written in similar settings to where they interfere with the story, really, because it's just when that's made the focus, it's usually done in such a way that it really damages the story, I feel like. So I loved how this book kind of in a passive way just shows you all these things as if you're living there, as if you're one of the characters and you're experiencing it, which was fascinating on a number of levels because it was really a time and place that I didn't know much about. It probably happens about 50, most of the story probably happens between 50 and 70 years after the Civil War. It's in a time of pretty complete segregation. And what's interesting about that is that you definitely see a lot of conflict, a lot of horrible injustice when the cultures do overlap. But there's also this view and this picture that I hadn't really seen before in literature of a lot of really happy times and a lot of fun and vibrancy of culture in these small communities. So it's even amidst these difficult times, there's these moments of brightness and just good humor and enjoyment, full enjoyment of life that was really interesting. But the main focus of the book, so all that is setting and the background, and in that way, you really get to view it in, like I said, in a passive way that I think is really effective for feeling what it was like. But the main plot line is this young woman, Janie, kind of just navigating her way through life and through her ideas of what love is, and really just finding fulfillment in just in living and in feeling fulfilled in her soul. There's a lot of really beautiful ideas about that, but she kind of takes these ideas on this ride through 3 different husbands, and they're the story I feel like is kind of this contrast between these three different relationships, particularly between the second and third, because the first husband, I feel like, is more in the story to serve as a beginning point and like her beginning of disillusionment, because she's essentially given to him by her grandmother at like 17, I think. And he's like way older. It was an arranged marriage. Her grandmother was just desperate for her to be settled and safe before she died. And that was all she cared about. That she would be physically protected and taken care of. Which you can kind of understand. You get a little bit of background into the grandmother's story and some of her ideas and beliefs, and Janie kind of has to come to terms with some of her grandmother's ideas and beliefs. She obviously had resentment towards that on some level. But anyway, the first marriage is very brief, and yeah, it just kind of serves to show, to break down some of Janie's ideas, because she had this thought that marriage meant love, and even if she didn't care anything for this guy, when she was married to him, she must learn to love him. But it's not a happy relationship, obviously. And then the next one, I think the next two are what really contrast between, they're more real situations, I feel like. Her second marriage, I feel like, is even more sad in a lot of ways, because it felt more real to me. It felt more like what you often see in the world, is where they thought they were in love. They did have love for each other on some level. But that slowly this wall just grows between them. That they don't have similar interests. They don't understand each other. They aren't able to talk and communicate with each other. And this just wall of hurt and misunderstanding grows between them until they're totally estranged, and have a pretty miserable life for years and years. Contrasted with her third husband, who is all life and fun and including her in everything. When, her first husband was very controlling and shut her out of so many things, then it's this total contrast to this, to the next one, who really teaches her to kind of come alive again. And I'm not saying, one of the things that I like about the book is that I don't really know 100% how I feel about it. I think some of the things that it promotes I don't agree with, but I still like it as a book because it is really thought-provoking. The writing, too, is beautiful. There's this very poetic and complex, brilliant prose that starts the book and kind of continues for a little way, and then pretty much vanishes, only to pop out once in a while and kind of make you remember, like, oh wow, this is really amazing. As it really becomes immersed in the dialect of the time. It's a very dialogue heavy book, and it's a it's very, very rich in the dialect. And of course, this author is in tune with that. Like they say in any writing class, you cannot do dialects unless you are intimately familiar with them, unless you know them inside out. Otherwise, it would be a total disaster and it'll sound awful. She clearly is totally in tune with this. The dialect is super fun. It's bright. It's vibrant. It's spelled out phonetically, so it takes a little while to get used to it. At first, I was having a little trouble. I would have to sometimes kind of read things aloud, because it's spelled out that way. But you get used to it pretty quick, and it's just really fun. It's always really fun to be immersed in a certain area's way of speaking and their phrases and their expressions and everything like that. So it's not something you can just read through really fast, which I appreciate about it, because you have to kind of take your time and digest it, or you're just going to miss things. It's not a very long book, though. It's really short. It's really short, and I think it's meant to really be experienced slowly and savored and thought about. So like I said, I'm not sure if I 100% like it or agree with it in some ways, but I really appreciate the art of the writer. It's an incredible, incredible piece of writing on many levels, like the writing itself, but also as a history, as as just an examination of people's emotions and relationships. I think it's fascinating. Um, and it's really sad in a lot of ways, but it's also really joyous. Um, yeah, I'm really glad that I read it. It's not like anything I've read before. Um, and it's, like I said, it's super fun to really get immersed in such a different time and place and culture every once in a while, and to really feel like what it was like, because I feel like history books don't really show it. They talk about um the troubles at the time, which you definitely see. You see those clearly, that there are all kinds of very, very messed up ideas in this time, but you also see um, so much fun and life, um, and all these different layers of prejudices was really interesting, because of course it's a time of segregation, there aren't even that many white people in the book because they just didn't mix that much at that time. Um, and I appreciated how she dealt with that. It felt really real. There were good and bad instances, but even in the good interactions with these people, you don't feel a sense of, you just feel the time period very much. In a time where these people were not treated as equals, and was going to be a long time before that started happening. So there's that, but then there's this whole other level of these inter like these different levels of racism, I guess, within the culture. Racism of people who were lighter to people who were darker, even within the culture, which I don't remember really ever reading about anything quite like that dynamic that kind of happens in the book. Um, and the attitude, the prejudice against of this culture against the Indians, um, the Indian culture of the time period, how they thought they were just good for nothing. Um, it was really interesting. There's this all these layers, and the irony of it is kind of felt, but in a pretty subtle way. People, you can tell that the characters are feeling it in some way, but they aren't really exploring those ideas yet. Obviously, there were people who were in this time period, just not in this particular story. So it's just really fascinating, the way all of that kind of worked in the background, and it kind of leaves you to just have your own feelings about it, because to the characters it's just their world, and they don't examine it that much. They just accept most of what's going on, and so you're kind of left to be the one who's outraged by it, because they aren't really at this time, which again I think is such a good way of portraying this, rather than the very heavy-handed approaches we see in modern writing. But yeah, mostly my favorite thing is just the writing and some of the thoughts about love, about romance, and about life. And again, I don't agree with all of it. I don't agree with everything that I think she's trying to say. We can't always just run off and live life to the fullest, just of pleasure and enjoyment. Um, But I do think it's a super, I'm like still like processing it as I'm talking about it, because I don't fully know what I think about the book, but um I would recommend it, I guess, because it is thought provoking, and beautiful. And again, even if you don't agree with everything it's maybe saying, don't necessarily even think that you're meant to. It's a story about this person's life. This is what happened in their life. Um, and you can take from it what you will. Something that I also really, really appreciated about the book is that while it feels vibrant and colorful, and it does not shy away from depictions of violence and brutality in some areas, again, as opposed to much modern writing. If this book had been written now, it would be so different, because while it's a story that is predominantly about love, it's very clean. Like it's about married love. You know that these people are having intimacy, and it is very discreet about that, in a style of writing that I feel like is usually the opposite. There would be every opportunity for her to get a lot more graphic, and I feel like most other authors would have gone there, and she didn't. It's for how rough the book is in a lot of ways. It's very clean. Um, Not really any language other than the offensive terms that we in our culture now deem very offensive, that they use for each other in this time period. There's a lot of that, but other than that, there's not much cussing or anything like that. And in the descriptions of the intimacy, even with all three husbands, even though the book is largely about that, she keeps it really clean, which I really appreciate. And I don't feel like anything is missing because of that. I didn't really notice that wasn't there until I stopped and thought about it, which is proof that stuff doesn't need to be in books, because you don't really notice it when it's not there. You only notice it when it is. So anyway, I really appreciate that about it, and so kind of makes me not hesitate to recommend it. It's just a really interesting, thought-provoking, beautifully written read about a culture in a time and place, very specific time and place that I didn't really know much about. So those are my thoughts. I hope they're not too all over the place and confused, but this book is definitely kind of lends itself to that, which I think is a good thing. So anyway, thanks for watching. I will see you next time. Bye.